Hello and welcome to my presentation today. Today I'm going to take you through a topic that I think as I've researched this, I have found that I am very passionate about. So today I'm going to talk to you about the use of the universal design of learning strategies to design online skills-based training to meet the diverse learning needs of employees. Our presentation agenda is going to be focused on 5 key areas. The first one is I'm going to do a brief introduction and present to you the presentation framework. Here I'm going to give you sort of the approach that was taken to develop this research project, to talk about how it came about and certainly how it's applicable to everyday practice. Then I'll talk a little bit about the research topic itself. We'll talk about the problem, and I will review and present some of the research questions I would like to ask. Third point, we'll talk about some challenges and assumptions that are going to be encountered as the research and as the recommendations are made for using UDL in the corporate work field. The fourth bullet point is we'll talk about a trends and technology literature review. However, much of a review of the literature will also be included in the bullet points above. And then we'll end with a summary and some recommendations for next steps in moving forward. Okay, so my first information that I want to talk to you about today is an introduction and the framework. The topic, Universal Design for Learning. And really what universal design of learning is it's developing a scalable, individualized method for creating curriculum. Now, there are many definitions out there that talk about creating the who's, the what, and the why of the information you're trying to teach. And as you'll see in the next few slides, I'm going to focus on the application, how it's been applied in other educational settings, and certainly how we're going to look to apply it in this organization. The presentation framework. This framework will be more of a what I like to call a consultative model, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the next few minutes, in the next couple bullet points down. But given the nature of my research and given the nature of where I'd like to go in terms of this dissertation and what my future plans are for a dissertation, I approached this presentation as if I was going to be a consultant at an organization. So even though we were initially supposed to identify a problem within our present workplace and then try to apply some of our research to that problem, I work in academia at this point, and my goal for the future is to expand my professional skills in the corporate arena. So as I was researching through the class, I decided that I would try to um, take it from the approach of being a consultant, making recommendations. What sorts of things have already been done, and what do I think will work for this particular organization? So the crux of this presentation will be from again, a consultative model, and it will be, here's some of the best practices, here's how some of the recommendations that will be proposed will match that industry standard. And then certainly I'd like to take a more organizational focus, meaning I would like to look to identify what kind of an organization this particular research project may work towards. And I'm hopeful that as we move through our different classes in this program, that will help me to narrow that down. But the key area here is just to understand that I'm trying to take a more consultative approach to how could this be implemented. So anytime I'm making suggestions to my boss, it's actually to my consulting client. Okay, so let's get into and think about, what does universal design for learning really mean? Well, universal design for learning really suggests that instead of changing the learner, that we change the curriculum and teaching to meet the needs of the curriculum. So here's what this means. The first cartoon that I found that I thought really illustrated these points very well is the one here to the left, where they are shoveling snow. And the first one indicates, could you please shovel the ramp? To which the person shoveling says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you. And the point that the gentleman's making in the wheelchair is, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. So as we've looked at the varied learning needs of folks that don't meet the standard or don't meet a norm that we have perceived that they should, we will address them in another manner. And really, if we took a different approach and we tried to approach their learning, we may be able to find that there's one method that may work better for all involved. The second cartoon I have here talks about equity, and it indicates that if there's a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. So your exam is going to be, please climb that tree. Well, in this example, probably the monkey could do it. And that's about it by himself. And obviously the bird wouldn't need to climb because they could just fly. But the elephant and certainly the fishbowl and the dog would definitely need some assistance or some accommodation. So just in the nature that we present information, we design information, then creates this need for accommodation. So if we could look more towards the first example, where we create one solution that may meet many needs. The second example of this talks about the design of products, environments, and communication that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without adoption or specialized design. And McNichols in his article suggests that we should focus more on something that's usable potentially by all people versus trying to have accommodations or any specialized design. And that comes about into play when we think about our educational experiences. Usually we make accommodations for students who may need a little bit more time, who may need a different way of getting the information. This universal design of learning actually suggests that you remove barriers to learning. So if you look at these first three pictures, and I love this picture, and I hang this picture up in my office to remind me that this is an important facet of universal design of learning. In the first image, it's assumed that if we give everyone the same support, they're being treated equally. Okay? And that's indeed true. You see that they all have a box to stand on. So we all gave them all the same box, and then we assumed that since we did all the same thing for them, that they should be able to achieve the same result, or at least be able to overcome the barrier. As you can see, that's not the case here. In the second scenario here, you see in the second image, the individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. So here, they're all being treated equitably. Again, we have the one child to the left who needs no accommodation, the one in the middle needs one, and the other needs two. Now granted, we've given them some specialization or some adaptation so that they can learn, but we haven't really met the needs of everyone without some sort of a deviation. The third one, I think, captures the very essence of universal design, or UDL. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodation because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systematic barrier has been removed. So instead of trying to accommodate for the barrier, in our third image, we try to take a look at what is the barrier and try to reduce or eliminate that barrier so that every person has the same opportunity to learn and hopefully achieve the same result. And this is very different than what students are typically used to and their educational experiences. My daughter, for example, has some learning accommodations that requires additional time on tests, etc. And sometimes those things are successful and sometimes they're not. So we look to what kinds of barriers does she have and how do we approach trying to get rid of those barriers? Because if those barriers are impacting her, they may also be impacting other learners as well. And we're going to look at some more examples as we go through. Now, the research topic here is the use of universal design of learning strategies to design online skills-based training to meet the diverse learning needs of employees. So we have three fundamental questions that I've set out to try to answer. The first one is, do our traditional workplace learning accommodations proposed in our current literature address our diverse learning needs? What happens to those employees who might have received learning or instructional accommodations throughout their educational experiences now when they're in the workplace and no longer have those accommodations available? And then question 3, does the use of UDL in the design meet those diverse needs? So really, if we can answer questions 1 and 2, then we should be able to then answer question 3. So let's talk about some challenges and assumptions. And again, I included the same pictures from the earlier example just to give you some guidance on thinking about how we change our approach. The first challenge I had found here in our literature, and certainly through private practice, was a few things. First, it's very difficult to identify those in the workplace who may have varied learning needs for a number of reasons. First, they may not want to self-identify. They may have a fear in identifying that maybe they have some learning needs that are different than others because they may fear that they were discriminated against. They may not know they require a different approach to learning. And the literature seemed to speak about this a lot, that there are many people who will be in the workforce, go through varied levels of training, and never even know that they needed an approach. I like to call that the I don't know what I don't know approach. There's a lack of organizational support for addressing the learning needs of individuals that aren't your traditional employees. And the literature described, and I'm really looking to focus on those who have what they call a hidden disability, which means that within a hidden disability, you don't know by looking at the person that they would require any differences or any accommodation. Now remember, one of the things I'm trying to really work through is getting away from an accommodation, an assistive technique, and how do we repurpose that training and that design of training to provide an acceptable method for all. You're going to have we have some organizational culture issues and organizational expense in terms of maybe the culture of the organization doesn't support thinking out of the box, changing how they feel about the delivery of learning, how they measure learning. Organizational culture, organizational expense, and certainly buy-in and return on investment. Those are three key areas that are needed in order to support the design of online skilled training using a UDL methodology. And quite frankly, it hasn't been an instructional design focus. Ironically, when I went through and was looking at the literature, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of individuals really even investigating how we can best use UDL in the workforce. There's a tremendous amount of literature about how it's used in academia, all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade and beyond, even in some colleges. But there seems to be a very small amount of information that really talks about how do we do that in the corporate world. And then many people, many instructional designers also confuse learning needs with learning styles. So, they may design training saying, oh, well, I'm going to design this based on being a visual learner or being an auditory learner. And that should meet the needs of those individuals who have disabilities. And that has been farther from the truth. Learning styles really has nothing to do with learning needs. The second challenge and sort of theme that I found in the literature so far is current instructional design practices and the current role of the instructional designer. Now, I've kind of steered away up to this point to use the average student term, but really when training is created, it's created to this invisible average student. And it doesn't, and then we'll deal with the alternate needs later or in a different forum. And that goes to our second picture there. Hey, I'll shovel the sidewalk here for all of the average students, and then I'll get to you later on. And, as that cartoon had pointed out, if we looked at managing potentially the ramp or the alternative method, we might find a method for training delivery that would meet everyone's needs. The present practice is to accommodate for the student, not the curriculum. And again, we're all familiar with that at some point. And again, the literature talked time and time again about giving individuals a quiet time. Many articles talk about dealing with different learning needs by giving them structure, helping them to manage their time, all changing the behaviors of the learner and never changing the behaviors of the student. So this is really flipping around the focus for the instructional designer. And presently, a lot of instructional design practices aren't built for that. That is not how training is delivered or planned for. So there really is this shift and change, so to speak, of how you are approaching training and design. There seems to be a heavy reliance on technologies, and this was prevalent not only in the literature, but in some of our discussions as we move through the course, when we were asked to really determine what the learning needs of some frontline employees were. Many of us recommended that we use an LMS and we create games and we create a test. That way we can all deliver this the same way to all the people that we need to train, and then we'll have a way of measuring. And while that's a concrete approach, it has a real reliance on technology. So what we want to do is we want to leverage technology in such a way that it will help us deliver education and not so much be a platform for just as a means of communicating training. You want to take more of an expanded approach. A lot of instructional design teams and designers themselves do not recognize the importance of UDL principles. Some of the instructional designers I talked to about this topic when I was thinking about doing this as a research project and doing some consultation on it, I found that weren't even really familiar with it. And if they were, it was, that's an education thing. It really wouldn't work here. So, I think there's a lot of education that would need to be done of instructional designers in order to get them to understand and to shift the paradigm of thinking, so to speak, to look at the curriculum and accommodating the curriculum versus accommodating the student. Many instructional designers are what we call project focused. They operate in silos. I come in, I design training, I write training, I deliver training, I measure training, I'm done. And while that's okay, you really don't get a good sense of what are the needs of the people that you're looking for and who are we asking about those needs. That's super important as well. UDL requires that the instructional designer serves as a consultant. Let's look at those barriers. Let's sort of work side by side with our customers, our learners themselves. Maybe if they can't identify their learning barriers, that we can get there and identify them for them, so that when we create training, we're creating training and programs that are usable by large amounts of people with very little accommodation or assistance necessary. And the third challenge is this online skills-based training. In many cases, this has been static training methods used. There's been no employee engagement, which means if I have a skill or a process I want you to learn, I may go through, create a presentation, step 1, step 2. You may even have a little bit of engagement where you interact with it, but for the most part, it's static. The second piece is processes rapidly change. So we're going to need to design our training, our online skills training, to keep up with those process trainings. Skills-based training many times is challenging to deliver in the online environment. How do we recreate maybe steps and interactions and going into systems? How do we really replicate what is going on with the employee? And again, hearkening back to that scenario we had, how do we replicate what the frontline employees are going to be doing in order to create their training? Understanding of the process. Sometimes we use ineffective methods. Some of the suggestions that were made when we looked at that scenario was to, send out surveys or ask questions or whatever. And those are good tools, and those are beginning tools. But in order to really understand learning needs and to deliver online skills-based training, you really need to have an understanding of the process. Now, that doesn't mean that instructional designers need to be subject matter experts, but they do need to understand people, and they do need to be able to observe and spend some time with the people who are their learners to understand the process, but to also understand the likes and dislikes of the people that they're going to be designing training for. Some folks have a one-size-fits-all, and that goes back to that individual average group. They use traditional methods of design that's standardized. We're going to give everybody the same quiz, we're going to give you the same amount of time, and we're going to assess it the same way. And again, that goes back to that first cartoon here on the top. For a fair selection, everybody's going to take the same exam, and you're going to climb the tree. Well, that's a skill, right? And we're going to measure that skill by giving you a standardized test. And obviously for some of the people there in that picture, that won't work. There's some technology requirements, and then the curriculum has to match the tool used. Okay, so trends in technology as far as a literature review. There were some key areas that the literature really focused on. Again, the literature talks a lot about adults with learning disabilities within the workforce. And when we look at learning disabilities, they are very clear learning disabilities, things like ADHD, autism, maybe cognitive, educational types of things. Where the literature's lacking, though, is in those disabilities where or learning needs that vary, that are not easy to see. So, the focus in the literature so far has been adults with learning disabilities that are easily identifiable. To date, the UDL has only been used in educational settings. There were very few articles that I was able to research and really discover that use some of these practices in the corporate setting. Um, and some of the ones that I did locate were a little bit older. So, that tends to believe that there's some momentum now for sort of looking at our common everyday tools, things like a smartphone, other types of technology that may be out there, and how do we use those as tools to provide um, learning opportunities. There's a relationship between assistive technology and UDL practices. And in this scenario, much of the literature talked about using sort of assistive technologies, things that could provide transcripts or could make big letters, or how you would not use any pictures or highlighting or colors because certain assistive technology pieces couldn't use those. So there seems to be a relationship initially between some of those technologies and UDL practices. And then the last one is online skills-based training. While there's a lot to really look at competency-based training in academic settings, there is not a whole lot in terms of what are we doing online to really build a skills-based training. So those were our key technology and focus literature areas. So my summary and my recommendations are: first, to build a consultative model within the instructional design team. So instructional designers now become learning consultants and then learning designers. And that seems to be a process of learning how to be a consultant, to determine needs, to build on those needs, and then designing based on those needs. Build a culture where learning differences are encouraged, and get away from the one size fits all and the invisible average student. Provide a mechanism for identifying learning barriers. Consider how we may use our technology and leverage that usage to meet learning needs. Um, and an example of that may be if our skill is to come to my house at 3 p.m. and I give you I'll tell you, you can use any tool you want, but I'm going to measure your success or your failure based on if you get to my house at 3 o'clock. So some of us may choose to use the GPS on our smartphone. If we use the GPS on our smartphone, that gives us a map. It allows us to print out our directions. It gives us speech. It gives us a visual. So there's many different approaches to that map, and that will help me to get there. Okay, so how do we leverage our current technology to meet the various learning needs? We also need to recognize the organizational benefit and return on investment. Not does only UDL help those who have varying learning needs, it also helps those who are from different cultures, who may have a different approach to learning. and then identify our organizational structure and the appropriate culture where an organizational strategies would work. So that as my next steps going through my classes will be to identify an organizational structure, organizational culture, and the type of organization that we could actually go out and test and build their instructional design team and practices using universal design of learning. And the next two slides, and my last two slides, are my references that were specific to some of the things that I spoke of here. At resources such as Attitudes Towards People with Disabilities, a conversation with my daughter about her learning needs after graduation, the different requirements in under the American with Disabilities Act. There was actually a study done in 2006 that there was some look at a very small amount of information on corporate technical training design, a quantitative study. So that seemed to be very important in informing my research project. Looking at how Ketter provided some background on the hidden disability, employees with disabilities. What are some of the strategies that they can use to find success? And as you'll see, with simple accommodations. So the industry is still looking at meeting needs based on accommodations for students. So that concludes my discussion. I look forward to hearing any guidance that anyone has, any discussions or questions. Thank you very much.